The fluorescent lights in First National Bank buzzed overhead as I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at the stack of documents before me. My father, Robert Chen, sat beside me with that familiar stern expression that had dominated my childhood. The same look he'd given me when I'd disappointed him at piano recitals, when my grades weren't perfect, when I'd chosen art over business school. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Sarah, we've discussed this, he said in that clipped tone that brooked no argument. Your grandmother's inheritance needs to be managed properly. You're only 22. You don't understand the complexities of wealth management. I wanted to laugh at the irony. At 22, I was apparently too young to manage my own inheritance, but old enough to sign it all away to him. The documents spread across the mahogany desk detailed the transfer of my grandmother's entire estate. The house in Pacific Heights, the investment portfolio, the antique jewelry collection, even the small art gallery she'd left specifically to me. Everything that represented her love, her independence, her fierce spirit that had inspired me to pursue my dreams despite my father's disapproval. Mr. Chen, the bank manager, Patricia Williams, said as she reviewed the paperwork. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of professional competence that immediately put me at ease. I want to make sure Sarah understands exactly what she's signing here. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Sarah is well aware of the arrangements. Aren't you, sweetheart? The endearment felt like acid on his tongue. He hadn't called me sweetheart since I was 7 years old and had proudly shown him a painting I'd made of our family. He'd looked at it with disgust and told me to focus on real subjects instead of wasting time with childish nonsense. But I nodded anyway, because that's what I'd been trained to do my entire life. Nod. Agree. Submit. Don't cause a scene. Don't disappoint him further than I already had by existing. The betrayal had started 3 weeks ago, right after Grandma Lily's funeral. I'd been grieving, barely functioning, when my father had approached me with what he called a practical solution to a complicated situation. Your grandmother was eccentric, he'd said, pacing his pristine home office while I sat curled in the leather chair that still smelled faintly of his expensive cologne. She left you everything, but Sarah, you have to understand. This kind of money, these properties, they require sophisticated management. You're an artist. You paint pretty pictures. You don't understand investments, taxes, property management. Each word had been a calculated strike at my confidence. At the time, overwhelmed by grief and his relentless logic, I'd almost believed him. Almost. Then I'd found Grandma Lily's letter. It had been tucked inside her old jewelry box, the one she'd kept on her vanity table. I'd gone to her house, my house now, technically, to begin the overwhelming task of sorting through her belongings. The letter was written in her distinctive handwriting, slightly shaky from arthritis but still elegant. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect your father is already pressuring you about the inheritance. I want you to know that I left everything to you for a reason, not out of some sentimental whim as he will undoubtedly claim. I know my son. I raised him after all, though I sometimes wonder where I went wrong. Robert has always believed that control equals love, that managing someone's life is the same as caring for them. He controlled your mother until she became a shadow of herself. He's tried to control you your entire life, and now he'll try to control this inheritance. But I also know you, my brave girl. You have my stubborn streak, even if you've learned to hide it. You're stronger than you think, and you're certainly smart enough to handle money and property. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I left you that gallery because I believe in your talent and your dreams. I left you the house because everyone deserves a place where they can be truly themselves. I left you the investments because financial independence is the greatest gift I can give you. Trust your instincts. Trust yourself. And whatever you do, don't let Robert convince you that you're not capable. You are your grandmother's granddaughter, and that means you're capable of anything. All my love, Grandma P.S. If he does try to manipulate you into signing everything over to him, remember what I taught you about being clever. Sometimes the direct approach isn't the only way to fight back. Reading that letter had been like being struck by lightning. Every interaction with my father over the past 3 weeks suddenly made sense. The way he'd pushed the meeting at the bank, the way he'd insisted I didn't need a lawyer. Just unnecessary expense and complication, Sarah. The way he'd systematically undermined my confidence while positioning himself as the responsible, caring father looking out for his naive daughter. But Grandma Lily had taught me more than just painting techniques during those long afternoons in her studio. She'd taught me strategy, patience, and the art of observing people. Watch their hands, not their words. She used to say, hands tell the truth. Now, sitting in the bank, I watched my father's hands. They were tense, fingers drumming against his thigh. A tell he'd had since I was a child, appearing whenever he was lying or anxious about something. Mrs. Williams was still reviewing the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is quite comprehensive," she said. "Sarah, you're essentially signing over power of attorney and full control of all assets to your father. This would mean—" "She understands," my father interrupted smoothly. "We've gone over this extensively. Sarah knows this is the best option for everyone involved." But Mrs. Williams ignored him, keeping her attention on me. "This would mean you'd have no access to the funds or properties without your father's permission. You'd essentially be financially dependent on him indefinitely." The room felt suddenly airless. This wasn't just about the inheritance. This was about my freedom, my future, my ability to make my own choices. This was about reducing me to the same powerless position my mother had occupied until the day she died. I started to speak, then stopped. My father's intense gaze felt like a physical weight. "Sarah's just a bit overwhelmed," he said with that practiced smile he used in business meetings. "It's a big responsibility, and she knows she's not ready for it." That's when I remembered Grandma Lily's postscript about being clever. The direct approach wasn't the only way to fight back. Under the pretense of reaching for my purse to get a tissue, I quickly scribbled a note on a small piece of paper. "I don't want to sign this. He's pressuring me. I don't feel safe saying no in front of him. Please help." When Mrs. Williams handed me a pen to begin signing, I palmed the note and passed it to her as I took the pen. The exchange was so subtle that my father, busy reviewing his phone, missed it entirely. Mrs. Williams glanced at the note, and I saw her expression change almost imperceptibly. Her professional mask remained in place, but something shifted in her eyes, a sharpness, a protective instinct that reminded me suddenly of Grandma Lily. "You know what?" she said, setting down her own pen. "I realize I need to make copies of some additional documents before we can proceed. Sarah, would you mind coming with me to the copy room? I want to explain a few things about the inheritance tax implications." My father looked up from his phone, annoyed. "Is that really necessary? We're in a bit of a hurry." "I'm afraid it's required by law," Mrs. Williams said with calm authority. "We need to ensure the beneficiary fully understands all ramifications. It'll just take a few minutes." Once we were alone in the copy room, Mrs. Williams turned to me with concern written all over her face. "Are you being coerced into this?" The simple question, asked with such genuine care, broke something open inside me. For the first time in 3 weeks, maybe in years, someone was asking what I actually wanted. "Yes," I whispered. and felt the word unlock something in my chest. He's been wearing me down for weeks. He keeps telling me I'm too young, too stupid, too impractical to handle my own inheritance. And I started to believe him. Mrs. Williams nodded grimly. I've seen this before, unfortunately. Financial abuse often starts with undermining someone's confidence in their own capabilities. The good news is, you haven't signed anything yet. But he'll be furious if I don't. You don't understand. When my father gets angry, I trailed off, remembering the cold silences that could last for weeks. The way he could make me feel like I'd committed an unforgivable sin simply by disagreeing with him. You're an adult, Sarah. He can't force you to sign anything. And more importantly, she leaned forward conspiratorially, your grandmother specifically requested that if anyone tried to pressure you into signing over your inheritance, I was to intervene. My eyes widened. She did? Lily Chen was a very smart woman. She came in here 2 months before she passed away and gave me very specific instructions. She suspected something like this might happen. Mrs. Williams smiled softly. She said you were stronger than you knew, but that you might need someone in your corner to help you remember that. Tears pricked at my eyes. Even after death, Grandma Lily was still looking out for me. What do I do? First, we go back in there and you politely decline to sign. Then we schedule a separate appointment for just you, where we can discuss your actual options for managing your inheritance. There are many ways to handle wealth responsibly without giving up control. He's going to explode. Let him. His reaction will tell you everything you need to know about his real motivations. When we returned to the office, my father was checking his watch impatiently. About time? Can we move this along? I sat down and looked directly at him for what felt like the first time in years. I'm not going to sign the papers. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Excuse me? His voice was dangerously quiet. I said I'm not signing. I want to manage my own inheritance. Sarah, we discussed this. You're not ready. Maybe I'm not ready right now, I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. But that doesn't mean I never will be. And it certainly doesn't mean I should sign over everything to you permanently. His composure finally cracked. You ungrateful little girl. After everything I've done for you, all the sacrifices your mother and I made. Don't you dare bring Mom into this, I snapped, and the force of my own anger surprised me. Mom died feeling powerless and controlled. I won't live like that. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll lose everything. You'll come crawling back to me within a year, begging me to fix the mess you've made. Maybe, I said, standing as well. But at least it'll be my mess to make. Mrs. Williams cleared her throat diplomatically. Mr. Chen, perhaps it would be best if you took some time to cool down. Sarah is well within her rights to decline this arrangement. He turned his fury on her. This is none of your business. This is between me and my daughter. Actually, sir, as the executor of Mrs. Lily Chen's estate and Sarah's banking relationship manager, it very much is my business to ensure her interests are protected. Something in her tone, professional but unmovable, seemed to remind my father that he was in a public place, in a professional setting, with a witness to his behavior. He straightened his tie and forced his features back into a mask of cold control. Fine, he said icily, but don't come running to me when you realize you've made the biggest mistake of your life. He gathered his papers and left without another word, not even looking back at me. In the silence that followed, I sank back into my chair, shaking with adrenaline and the aftermath of 22 years of suppressed rebellion. That was incredibly brave, Mrs. Williams said softly. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Sarah. It's feeling the fear and doing the right thing anyway. Over the next few weeks, I learned just how right she was. My father's campaign of psychological warfare intensified. He called constantly, alternating between rage and manipulation. He told relatives I was having a breakdown and couldn't handle the stress of the inheritance. He even showed up at Grandma Lily's house, my house now, demanding to be let in to talk sense into me. But something had fundamentally shifted. Reading Grandma Lily's letter, Mrs. Williams's intervention at the bank, finally standing up to him, it was like a spell had been broken. I began to see clearly for the first time in years. I hired my own lawyer, not one of his choosing. I met with financial advisors who treated me like an intelligent adult, not a child who needed managing. I started making decisions, small ones at first, then bigger ones. I kept the house and began converting Grandma Lily's studio into my own art space. I kept the gallery and started planning my first solo exhibition. Most importantly, I began to understand that my father's anger wasn't really about the money, though the financial control certainly mattered to him. It was about losing his power over me. For my entire life, he'd maintained control through a careful system of emotional manipulation, undermining my confidence while positioning himself as my savior, creating dependence while claiming to act in my best interests. The inheritance had represented his final chance to lock me into that dynamic permanently. 3 months after the confrontation at the bank, I held my first art exhibition at Grandma Lily's gallery. I'd titled it Emerging, and every painting explored themes of breaking free, finding voice, claiming independence. The centerpiece was a portrait of my grandmother, painted from memory but somehow more alive than any photograph. My father didn't come to the opening, of course, but Mrs. Williams did, along with several other people who had become part of my new support system. My lawyer, my financial advisor, even the contractor who'd helped me renovate the studio. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Mrs. Williams said, standing before the portrait. "I think she knew this would happen," I replied. "Not the specifics, but she knew I'd find my way eventually. She believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself. That's the greatest gift anyone can give." That night, after the guests had gone and I was alone in the gallery surrounded by my work, I found myself thinking about revenge. For months, I'd fantasized about more dramatic confrontations with my father, public scenes where I'd expose his manipulation, legal battles where I'd prove he'd tried to defraud me, elaborate schemes where he'd face consequences for years of emotional abuse. But standing there in my grandmother's gallery, surrounded by my own art, in a space that was entirely mine, I realized I'd found something better than revenge. I'd found freedom. My father had spent his entire adult life trying to control the people around him. He'd succeeded with my mother, and he'd nearly succeeded with me. But in the end, his need for control had cost him the very thing he'd been trying to preserve, a relationship with his daughter. The real revenge wasn't in hurting him back. It was in becoming the person he'd tried so hard to prevent me from being. It was in proving that everything he'd said about my incompetence, my naivety, my inability to handle responsibility was wrong. It was in living well. 6 months later, I received a letter from him. Not an apology. My father wasn't capable of that level of self-reflection, but an acknowledgement, grudging and bitter, that I seemed to be managing adequately on my own. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he'd always been proud of my artistic talent, though he'd worried it wouldn't be practical. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd once dreamed of, but it was a kind of peace. He was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to position himself as the reasonable father who'd had legitimate concerns. But his words couldn't touch me anymore. I'd learned the difference between love and control, between protection and manipulation, between caring and possession. I'd learned that standing up to someone you love is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself. Most importantly, I'd learned that Grandma Lily had been right about everything. I was stronger than I'd known. I was capable of managing my own life, my own finances, my own future. And I was definitely my grandmother's granddaughter. The bank manager who'd helped me find the courage to say no had become a friend. The gallery that had almost been signed away now displayed my work and the work of other emerging artists. The house that represented my freedom had become a place where I could finally be myself. And every morning, when I walked into my studio and saw Grandma Lily's easel still set up in the corner, now holding a new painting I was working on, I whispered the same words. Thank you for teaching me to be clever. Thank you for believing I was strong enough. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. The note I'd slipped to Mrs. Williams that day had been a desperate plea for help. But it had also been my first act of rebellion, my first step toward reclaiming my voice. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the biggest changes. Sometimes a hidden note can save your entire future. And sometimes, the best stories aren't about getting revenge on the people who wronged you. They're about becoming so fully yourself that their attempts to diminish you simply can't reach you anymore. In the end, that's exactly what happened. I didn't destroy my father, didn't ruin his life or expose his manipulation to the world. I simply grew beyond his ability to control me. And that, I learned, was the sweetest revenge of all.